Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Elise Bartosik Vélez, and I'm a professor here at Dickinson since 2003 in the Spanish department. I'm actually trained as a comparativist and in literature. However, I usually do historical work, so I work on history, and as a comparativist, I work on the colonial period in both British America and Spanish America and the Atlantic world in general. I'm really interested in how ideas transfer from the old world to the new. So today I'm going to be talking about Christopher Columbus. I feel like everybody has an opinion about Christopher Columbus. I think that recently in our culture there's been a reassessment of who Columbus was. And I'm sure you are well aware. I'm going to go to a couple images here. Let me see if I can remember how to do this. Screen share, right? Here. Wait. People can see your screen, right? Okay, so if I go here. Nope, that's that. All right, here we go. So you'll see that this is from CNN, from the webpage of CNN in April of this year, that more than 60 cities and states in the US no longer observe Columbus Day. Instead, they're observing Indigenous Peoples Day or something akin to that. And this started, probably back in the 80s and 90s, this push to change the way we think about Columbus as not a hero, but rather a representative of the violence that was inflicted on indigenous peoples during the conquest of the New World. Here's a list of some of those cities and states. You'll see that the one that surprised me was Maine, that now they're observing Indigenous Peoples Days. I think a place like South Dakota or even New Mexico, that's perhaps more understandable. But you'll see that obviously people are rethinking what Columbus means. My argument is, and I'll go back to the camera here. Yep. My argument, where'd we go? There we go. No, it keeps going back. There we go. So my argument is that this reassessment of who Columbus is merely the most recent of many, many reassessments of Columbus. And I would argue that even he himself portrayed his own enterprise and his own character in a variety of different ways during the course of his career. One of the things that I do is I work on all of Columbus's own writings. So this is a collection of Columbus's writings. It's pretty much everything he wrote with a few exceptions. Dickinson, the library, bought this for me, and I'm very grateful for their support of my research. But it was published in the 80s, and it's phenomenal to have everything together here that was previously in the archives in different documents. But one of the reasons why I had anything to say about Columbus was because historians, in my view, didn't read all of this. And they didn't read it in order, if they did read it all. And so they would focus on only one piece of it, instead of looking at the trajectory of how Columbus's writings changed over time. So my very first article, which was called, I don't know if you can see this, The 3 Rhetorical Strategies of Christopher Columbus. That was my very first article, the most cited, sadly. I wish people would cite the other ones too. But that article argues that Columbus started by portraying himself according to a pre-existing discourse of empire that the court of Ferdinand and Isabel was already promoting. And according to that discourse of empire, essentially the Spaniards had just kicked out the Moors after winning the Reconquest, right, which was the Spanish war against the Moors who had invaded the Iberian Peninsula beginning in 711. So they finally won this war in 1492. And Columbus comes along and he says, oh, I was there. Not only was I there at the final battle and the final, he didn't fight, but he was there for the final ceremony and the handing over of the key and, you know, the celebration essentially of the final victory of the Spaniards over the Moors. He says, I was there, and it was at that moment that the king and queen decided to send me abroad. Just decided to finance my voyage, which is completely false. He had been asking them for years to finance his voyage, and they may have had more resources to be able to do so after the end of the war. However, it wasn't a causal link the way that Columbus portrayed it. So I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint now for a little while. All right, I think people can see your screen. All right, so, all right. So Columbus portrayed himself as a figure of empire. That's my argument. And his enterprise he portrayed as an extension of this reconquest, this ideological war and a real war by Spain to reconquer its territory from the Moors. And so he did this by doing things like this. This was in the prologue to his journal on the first voyage. He said, this present year of 1492, after your highnesses had brought an end to the war against the Moors who ruled in Europe and had concluded the war in Granada where, and now I'm paraphrasing because it goes on and on, he says, I saw you raise your standards in victory. It was very important to be a personal witness to events in the 15th century. It gave you a lot more authority if you said that you were there, whether it was true or not. And then he said, and you also at that moment, you thought of sending me, Cristobal Colon, to the said regions, and now I can't read my PowerPoint, hold on, I'm just gonna, oh shoot, what did I do? Here we go. To the said regions of India, to see the said princes and the peoples and the lands and the characteristics of the lands and of everything, and to see how their conversion to our holy faith might be undertaken. Now you'll see in that last phrase, and to see how their conversion to our holy faith might be undertaken, that is Columbus's addition. There's nothing in the original documents that were signed by the king and queen authorizing Columbus to take this voyage that talks about evangelization. And this is what Columbus is doing. He's inserting a religious motive into his enterprise and saying that this is one of the reasons why it was originally undertaken. And if you look at, I'm going to switch here to this document, is a photograph of the original contract that was signed by the king and queen authorizing Columbus to go on his first voyage. It's dated March of 1493. It's called the Capitulations of Santa Fe, and Santa Fe is where it was signed. And there's nothing in there that talks about a religious reason or motivation for this voyage. It was strictly a commercial enterprise authorizing Columbus to go out and trade with whoever he might find, and to find what they might want, what they have that we might want, and what we have that they might want. So going back to this other slide, when you have Columbus sort of inserting at the end here, and to see how their conversion to our holy faith might be undertaken, he was completely sort of sliding that in the last moment. And if you look at over the course of time, Columbus, it's at the end of this sentence here, that religious motivation. But as his career progresses, you'll see in his writings, he switches it to the beginning. So it'll still have all that commercial stuff, the reason, why to find the people and to trade with them, and the religious stuff eventually goes at the beginning. And so my argument is that he starts to depict himself as a player in this ideological war waged by the Catholic kings of Spain against the infidels. And this ideological war was a war of expansion, and it was an expansion of the Christian empire, what was thought of as a Christian empire. Now this map is from the 13th century, so quite a bit earlier, but it's representative of this a worldview that was still shared in the 15th century, at the end of the 15th century. So here you have the world mapped on the body of Jesus. Here, his head is up at the top, and his little feet are at the bottom, and his two little hands are out at east and west, essentially. And at the very center, that brown square in the center, that's the city of Jerusalem, because these maps weren't mapping the geography of the world as we do now. Maps at that time mapped ideology, mapped how people thought about the world, including the history of the world. So you'll see at the top here, there's also the Garden of Eden and the three rivers of paradise, etc. So the idea that Columbus wanted to participate in this ideological war to regain the heart of Christendom, which was Jerusalem, which had been, and this is important, it had been taken by the Turks in 1453. So he actually said in his first letter to the king and queen, he said, with all the stuff that we can get from the Indies, all the spices and the gold that I found, although he found very little gold, he said, with all the money that we can get from there, in 7 years from today, I will be able to pay your highnesses for 5,000 cavalry and 50,000 foot soldiers for the war and conquest of Jerusalem, for which purpose this enterprise was undertaken. Now, I have many colleagues in the field that use this sentence here, where it says, for which purpose this enterprise was undertaken, as absolute proof that Columbus started his voyage for religious reasons, to evangelize and to, convert people. However, my argument is that this was all spin, that Columbus was a really brilliant spin master or spin doctor or whatever we might say today. He was really good at propaganda. And he knew this kind of discourse that was circulating in the Spanish court, and he just sort of plugged himself and his enterprise into it. So that's my argument, is that Columbus was depicting himself as a figure of empire. Here we go. He represents himself as an agent of empire, and this empire was a universal Christian empire. I only have 7 minutes left, so I'm going to just real quickly say that the very first historians that talked about Columbus, like this guy, Peter Martyr, whose book came out in 1511, portrays Columbus as an Aeneas figure. And if you remember your classics, you'll remember that Virgil told the story of the founding of the Roman Empire, and his hero was Aeneas. And so Peter Martyr is telling the story of the founding of the Spanish Empire, and he portrays Columbus as a neo-Aeneas, as a new Aeneas. And Peter Martyr is essentially hijacking this idea, appropriating this idea of translatio imperati, which was around for a long time in the Western world, this idea that empire moved gradually westward from the east to the west. It was one empire, and it went from place to place. So first it went from Greece to Rome to Germany with Charlemagne, who was crowned Holy Roman Emperor in 800. And then depending on who was telling the story, to France, England, or Spain. And then the part that really interests me is then the Americas, because this is exactly the story we get in the United States. So someone like Joel Barlow, who was a poet and a writer, was writing at the time of the American Revolution and the early Republic. He writes a long epic poem called the Columbiad. Not very many people read it today, but it's really fun. So he's writing essentially an epic to the hero, or the founder of the American Empire, who he sees as Columbus, just as Virgil wrote his epic praising the founder of the Roman Empire, Aeneas. So the Aeneid, the Columbiad. So they're kind of similar in what they're trying to do to laud the founder. So you'll see the beginning of Barlow's poem, I Sing the Mariner Who First Unfurled an Eastern Banner Over the Western World, is very much like the beginning of the Aeneid. Arms and the man I sing, the first who came, compelled by fate and exile out of Troy to Italy and the Lavinian coast. This idea of this westward movement, bringing your empire westward. So this basically takes off in the United States, and you all know that our capital was named after the Washington, but also the District of Columbia in 1790. We have, sort of, this is just a random image. It was from a biography of Columbus in the 19th century, but Columbus here is included in sort of the heroes of the nation: Washington, Franklin, Jefferson, Adams, and the odd man out here is Lafayette, the Frenchman. But Columbus is taking this sort of incorporated as a hero of the nation, as a founder of the nation. And in a feminized version of Columbus, we have Columbia, which becomes very popular starting in about the 1780s and through the 19th century. And I love this image of, this is from the Columbia Brewing Company, but you'll see this allegorized, this version of Columbus and a feminine figure, Columbia, in a Roman toga draped in the American flag, and she's on top of the world, dominating the world. She also has a shield. She doesn't have any weapons, but the conquest has already been won, and it clearly was a conquest, a military conquest, and she has that shield there to represent that. This is another really cool image of Columbia dominating the continent with the Capitol building in the end, in the background there. And all of this depiction of Columbus as a figure of empire in the United States really comes to an apogee in the World's Columbian Exhibition of 1893 in Chicago. It was a huge event. It was commemorating the 400th anniversary of 1492, but it was so big, as you'll see here, it was just absolutely huge, that they needed another year to plan it. So it didn't open until 1893. I love this pamphlet of the exhibition. You'll see here in the corner, there's Columbus there with the palm fronds, sort of reminding us of the originary moment of his discovery in the Bahamas. Yet here we have Lake Michigan. But the fact that it's Lake Michigan is really interesting because this was the court of honor, and we have Lake Michigan in the background. And all this classical statuary here reminding us of these, of essentially the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire. And at the end, with Lake Michigan in the background, there's a big statue of the Republic here, dressed in a Roman toga with a staff of power, the globe, an eagle, again, all very reminiscent of Rome. But I'm really interested in this peristyle at the top of that arch at the end, and this is a close-up of that statue. It's called the Columbus Quadriga. It shows Columbus essentially as a Roman general, a victorious Roman general that had been granted a triumph, entering the gates of Rome. So here's Columbus arriving at the western shore of Lake Michigan, very much the way that the victorious Columbus, as a military conqueror, conquering territory for Spain, arrived in the Bahamas. It's just really quite interesting. And I know it's about 20 after now, so I'm just going to end with this image here of that the Columbus Quadriga, Roman, that shows Columbus as a Roman emperor, a Roman general, right? Victorious, heroic, symbolic of the United States at this moment of imperial expansion. You know, we're just a few years away from 1898 when the U.S. gains the territories of the Philippines and Puerto Rico. Compared to this poster from, I believe it's from 2004, that shows this real change in the way that we're viewing Columbus as responsible for the genocide, racism, and imperialism that was wrought in the New World. So, any questions? I kind of just tried to take a little slice of my research, but I could talk about anything that you have any questions. Oh, and before I forget, shout out to Captain Placey, class of 52. I hope you're out there. I know Captain Placey suffered through my book, and this is my book. Oh, wait, hold on. I need to go to the camera. There we go. Oh, no one can see you. Sorry. Here we go. So, I know this is my book. It's called The Legacy of Christopher Columbus in the Americas. And I know that Captain Placey read it. So thank you, Captain Placey. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah, I can see the chat box. No questions so far. Yeah, if you have any questions, I would be thrilled to get your emails. I love talking about Columbus. So please let me know if you have any questions, even if it's, you know, about something I didn't talk about with regard to Columbus. Like, did he really cut people's noses off? Yes, he did. As punishment. Well, my guess is he himself did not, but he ordered that. That was a pretty common punishment, especially of indigenous peoples. So, great. Well, thank you so much. It was fun.